Hi everyone and welcome to the HaPi podcast, Healthcare and Pharmaceutical Insights. Series 2 is all about a day in the life of. I'm looking forward to spending time with a variety of different people in the healthcare and pharmaceutical industry, discussing what it is that they do on a daily basis. So sit back, relax and enjoy. Hi everyone and welcome back to another episode of HaPi, and this is a slightly different format that we're going to be going through for this podcast. And we're going to be looking around a bit more of a kind of presentation basis around the really crucial subject of resilience. So I'm really delighted to welcome three guests with me today. So Alison McClymondt, who is part of the Soke, and Ian and Mark from Future CX. Ian and Mark I've just done a podcast with, and many of you will probably be very familiar with them from the recent episodes. So before I hand over to them, let me just give you a little bit of background to both organisations, so that you know who they are, and in your own time you can look into either Future CX or the Soke when you have a moment. I'm going to read what these guys have very kindly sent me across about both companies. So the Soke, who I also have done a podcast with previously, the corporate division works with leaders aiming to improve the health and performance of their individual team members, whilst also serving the broader needs of the organisation. So in the approach that they assess health, well-being, and the ability to perform of our clients. And this means that the Soke believes that everyone is one of many parts influenced by all elements that factor into their lives, whether that be family, work, relationships, environment, and background. The Future CX, so Future CX, they put at the start, is that these guys love seeing people and teams in pharmaceutical and life science industries succeed. And hailing from the pharmaceutical and life science background, as these two individuals are, redefining customer-facing performance and commercial and medical teams is what drives the Future CX team. Many organizations are held back by their lack of entrepreneurial mindset development, as they tend to focus solely on building skills and tools. And these guys have seen this firsthand, which is why they've created a revolutionary tech-based system, which is called E3, that evaluates, develops, and embeds the right mindsets and behaviours to ensure that you can optimize your return of investment from customer-facing teams. Entrepreneurs are decisive, act on opportunities, and overcome challenges by being resiliently buoyant. So that's who we're with today. Thank you guys for joining us. And we are going to have a couple of presentations, a little bit on PowerPoint, a little bit of discussion, and some questions as well on resilience. So Alison, I'm going to come to you first.
Thank you.
And welcome. Thank you for being with us. I'm going to ask the two guys just to be very quiet in the background, which actually I know is quite difficult for these two guys.
Okay.
But they will have their moment. They will have their moment very soon. But I'm really pleased that you've decided to join. And you're going to talk a little bit of resilience, maybe from a more clinical aspect, aren't you, Alison? So I'll hand over to you just if you want to give us your thoughts on resilience from a clinical perspective. Welcome and over to yourself.
Thank you very much. So I think resilience is something that if you asked 5 people what is resilience, they'll give you very, very different questions, very, very different answers, I should say. And actually, resilience isn't a trait that you have or you don't have. It's a set of behaviours, actions, responses, very importantly, that actually can be learned. So sometimes we think of people as having a resilient personality, but what does that actually mean? I think when we talk about resilience from a clinical perspective, what we're actually talking about from a kind of neuroscience perspective, let's go there first. Resilient brains, we believe, are, or certainly neuroscience research would tell us, show higher activity levels in the prefrontal cortex. Now, the prefrontal cortex is as it says, the frontal part of the brain, and this is where we make our decisions. This is where we problem solve. It's also kind of semi-responsible for our creativity. So actually, when it works alongside the amygdala, which is our emergency or threat response of the brain, and it works really nicely in tandem. So let's say, for example, the amygdala fires up, we get a threat, or we get a sensory sense of threat introduced to the brain. And when the prefrontal cortex works in tandem with the amygdala, so it's really highly activated, we're seeing people who can respond to a threat. They can problem solve. They don't stay in that fight or flight response. They don't stay frozen. They don't stay withdrawn. They actually act in response to the threat. So they're looking for kind of logic. They're looking for reasoning. So when we say that actually resilient brains are those who show high activity in the prefrontal cortex, what we're actually saying is that these brains connect really well with our emotional center. So they don't allow the emotional center to take over. They actually work in tandem with it. And I think that's important when we talk about resilience, because actually it's tolerating adversity in pursuit of a goal that generates resilience. Because when we're faced with stress, and we're faced with stress every day, when we actually work alongside our kind of stress response and we find a way to think, well, how am I going to deal with this? What are my options here? How creative can I be in response to this? What can I do when I'm faced with this threat or danger? That's when we start building a resilient brain. And actually neuroscience would tell us that the brain is a plastic, which sounds like it's a fixed object, but actually it's, when we talk about neuroplasticity, we're actually almost talking about elasticity. So the brain can actually grow and develop these things. The more we use different parts of the brain, it's almost like a muscle, it gets stronger. So we actually can develop resilience. It's not something that, as I say, there's not a baby that's born more resilient than another baby. But I think there are certain areas that we see that help grow our resilience. So if you think of kind of social support, are you somebody that has a good network around you, obviously outside of your family, but maybe in your workplace, maybe in the hobbies that you do? When we feel connection and we feel that we have other people that we can rely on, they can also be part of our problem solving. So actually they will help build our resilience. Adaptability, of course, this is highly important. So if we're stuck in very kind of rigid or inflexible thinking, it's probably not likely that you're going to be a very resilient individual. Life throws all sorts of stuff at us all the time, and very rarely are we in control of that. So we need to be able to think on our feet, but also adapt to whatever's coming to us, and not think, oh, well, that didn't go the way I wanted it to, or I thought it would. Because as we say, life never goes quite like that. I also think there is a sense of when a person has a purpose or a goal, and not necessarily just something that, somebody else has told them to do, but when they've actually got an intrinsic sense of purpose, maybe that's values that they hold within themselves. I choose to live my life in a courageous way. I choose to live my life in a compassionate way. I choose to live my life in a kind way. When people can connect to that sense of purpose, we can actually see people finding, I guess, reason in the chaos, and a reason to sort of problem solve their way out of these things. And I actually did have, and forgive me if I look down, I don't want to get it wrong, but I actually did draft a little exercise for people or listeners to think about, I guess, ways that we can develop resilience. So the first thing, you could jot this down if you were listening and you wanted a piece of paper to do it, or you can do it in your mind, that's fine. So I want you to think about a time in your life when you thought doors were closed to you, and what that felt like, and where you were, and what your response was to it. I also want you to think about if any doors opened afterwards, and actually what would have happened if the first door never closed. So you could, if you're doing this on a piece of paper, you could write down the door that closed for me was, and then the door that opened for me was. And then afterwards, I'd like you to reflect and kind of respond to these questions. They're just sort of pointers. You don't have to answer all of them. But what led to the door closing? How long did it take you to realise that a new door was opening? What prevented you from seeing the new open door? What were the effects of the doors closing on you? Did the experience bring anything positive to you? What does a closed door represent to you now? And is there any room for growth after feeling a closed door? And now you could also think, just sort of the second part of the exercise is think of all the people that have helped you open doors in the past, and how did they help you? And how have you actually helped open doors for others? So the goal of that exercise is twofold. First, it's to make you aware that something, when something ends, we can also get a new beginning. And the end of something positive is not, it's not necessarily, it can be negative, but it also creates room. So maybe something we really enjoyed has ended, and that feels really negative, but actually it does create room for something new, positive coming in. And it also helps you become more aware of the shift that you need to have in perspective from focusing on what's not there anymore and to seeing the potential of the future. In psychology, we often talk about visualizing the positive future self as a way to instill, well, actually instill intrinsic motivation in a person, because it helps for somebody to see that the outcome is possibly positive rather than thinking it's not going to happen, because that helps somebody stay focused on that goal. And then secondly, this exercise also helps you aware of what currently prevents you from adapting to be a more optimistic outlook for when doors close. And this insight can be used to develop a more positive outlook for future closing doors. And I think this is really important when we look at resilience, because we need to believe that when life throws us knocks, we can get back up again and potentially do something even better, because that's actually what resilience is, I guess. I feel like I've talked for a long time, so that was my kind of take on, I guess, what resilience is.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Alison. That's really good. That's really helpful. I think just coming from that more clinical, getting people to think a little bit about that during that exercise as well, and hopefully people will do that. But no, that's really helpful as a way of introduction. So to dovetail very nicely into, I'm going to ask the guys from Future CX, Ian and Mark. They're now going to come from a slightly different angle. And I'm going to hand over to them now to maybe talk a little bit about resilience from maybe a slightly more commercial aspect, guys.
Yep, thank you, Colin, and thank you, Alison. Ian, if you want to fire the slides up, and whilst you do that, Alison, I was making some notes as you went along there, because it's just almost as if we've sat in a room with you, almost.
Thank you.
Yeah, because we're the words confidence, adaptability, purposefulness, and social support all fit into our presentation as well.
Amazing.
How amazing is that? How amazing. So yeah, fantastic. So from our perspective, from myself and Ian's perspective, what we'd love to do is probably bring a little bit more of the practical element to the sort of the pharma and life sciences side of things as well, with an approach focusing on if you want an entrepreneurial mindset for that sort of commercial success, how can you, as Alison suggested there, start to build a more resilient mindset? So that's the sort of the direction of we're going to travel in. Now, before we go any further, Ian, if you flick over to the next slide, we just want to be really clear on entrepreneurialism, because we know the word sometimes puts the fear into our industry, but to be really clear on the definition behind it, it's just a way of thinking that enables people to overcome challenges, just like Alison has spoken about there, you know, identify opportunities, that constant need to improve take continuous action, but ultimately to consistently drive business success. And like we heard from Alison, in order to do that, you will often get some challenges, barriers, stress points. So that ability to be resilient is crucial to be an entrepreneur within our business sector. So delving down just a little bit further, when we looked at all the behaviours and mindsets required to be entrepreneurial within our industry, you can see there under the domain of infinite mindset, that's where resiliently buoyant occurs. There are obviously 13 others as well. So Colin, if you're looking for another 13 podcasts, there we have another 13 titles right there if you need any. But today's focus,
thank you.
Not a problem at all. Glad to be of help. Today's focus is on being resiliently buoyant. So, I'm sure I was smiling when Alison said, if you ask anybody what resilience means, you will probably get 100, 200 different answers. So, are we going to define it for everybody today? Absolutely not. But can we provide some practical ways of becoming more resilient and being more buoyant at certain points in time? Yes, we can. And that's going to be our travel for today. So when I say today, I mean, if you think about a normal day, it always makes me smile, this slide, because I say this is a normal day and somebody said to me, that just feels like a normal minute to me. That sort of piece where I suppose the majority of us start our day, I would like to think, pretty positive. And then as we go through the day, there's challenges, setbacks, little knockbacks as well. And being resiliently buoyant, hopefully, as the slide will say in a moment, is that opportunity to bounce back from those challenges, those little stress points, those little bits of setback. So Ian, I think if you give it a little button press there we go, resiliently buoyant. So that's our definition. So very close to what Alison said around about that, capacity to recover quickly. Now, Alison, I know I can obviously clear. I mean, that's the definition we would go for. So hopefully, that pretty much aligns to what you said, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I was just looking at that slide and thinking I do this all the time.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
I probably should know better. I'm a psychologist, but I do this all the time. I think these things all the time.
Yeah, and I think nobody. I would imagine nobody is perfectly resilient. Has every answer to every challenge that they get, because in our world, I mean, if we think about it from our perspective, we might have some of the smaller knockbacks where a project doesn't get accepted. You've been putting some effort behind for a couple of weeks and it doesn't get accepted. It could be for the fact that you've been looking forwards to seeing a particular key opinion leader and you've had the appointment in the diary for a year, and that on the morning the customer cancels. How do you sort of bounce back from that? Or it could be something slightly larger, like you hear an announcement around a company restructure, or a leader you've worked with and had a brilliant relationship with over 4 or 5 years is moving on to another role, and you're sort of felt like you're being left afloat. So again, it could mean different things to lots of different people throughout the day. But coming back specifically to what Alison said around purposefulness, adaptability, confidence and social support, it's such a fantastic tie, because those are the 4 elements we consider as well. So there they are. And Alison, maybe you'd like to borrow this slide because it's perfect to exactly what you were talking about. So, but I'm going to hand over to Ian to just give us that little bit more of the sort of the practicality behind each one of these 4 elements. Yeah. Ian, my friend, over to you.
Thank you, Mark, and hello, everyone. I'm going to start by saying it's reassuring that we're in the right place, that given that we had absolutely no interaction before this webinar, Alison, we actually landed on the same 4 things as you did. So that's amazing. A massive relief. when you've got a clinical psychologist presenting it right before you. So that's good to know. So thank you. So let's dip into you started to dip into some of these things, Alison, and I think that's what we're going to do a little bit more now, just for a few minutes. So what do we actually mean? So purposefulness, you've talked about this. It's about having a really good idea about what it is that you're all about, whether that is a vision or a value or a very clear goal in your career or your life that you have thought an awful lot about, and that goal is really important to you. It's probably the biggest goal in your career or life, as I mentioned. And no matter what happens on a day-to-day, week-to-week, or even minute-to-minute basis, as we saw on the previous slide with Mark's little chart, that you continue to focus on that and you use that almost as a North Star to really think about, what have I learned? And we'll come on to this in a little bit more detail in a moment. What can I learn from that experience, and how does that help me get to my goal faster? Okay. Then we've got adaptability, which again, the world is, it's dynamic. We've gone through a huge amount over the last few years. The way that we work in pharma and life sciences bears little resemblance to how we worked 5 years ago, so pre-COVID. So that ability to be adaptable, to be flexible, to be open and embracing new ideas and new situations is critical. So, as it says there, dealing with self-sabotaging personality traits, such as a fear of uncertainty or change. How am I going to work in this new situation? How am I going to work on Teams? 4 years ago, we'd not heard of Teams. I don't think Teams existed 4 years ago. And here we are now speaking to lots of people through exactly that media. And we probably all use Teams or similar platforms on a day-to-day basis in work. So that adaptability is really important. We mentioned confidence, which is more around being more self-aware in terms of what are your skills, what are your strengths, and being more certain in your own and more confident in yourself in terms of what they are. So as it says, doing the right thing despite opposition. If you truly believe that you have a strength or something to bring, even if there are people that are telling you that that isn't the right thing to do, sticking with what you know is best. Yes, listen to advice, but sticking with what you know is the right thing to do, but also being willing to take risks where others may be less willing to do so. And actually, when you get things wrong, because you will get things wrong, we're all human beings, when you make mistakes, make sure that you learn from them. Okay. And then finally, linked to the confidence piece is this social support. And again, Alison, you touched on this really, really nicely, is that, quite often, and I'm thinking of some of the examples that Mark talked about, where you go through restructures or a boss that you all love and respect leaves, quite often you immediately face the impending doom of what that's going to mean. And if you're surrounded by naysayers and people that think that way, guess what? They're going to bring you down too. So can you build a positive social support network around you that help you lift your head above the parapet and look for the positives and look for the opportunity? A little bit like your doors exercise, Alison, that you talked about a few minutes ago. So just to build a little bit more on each of those, what I would encourage people to do is, okay, if you're listening now, again, with your pen and paper that you've got to hand, is give yourself a score for each of those 4 things, whether that's 1 to 5, 1 to 10, it doesn't matter. But whichever of those 4 things that you score the lowest, then maybe that's the thing to think about first as a practical first step to enhancing and building your own resilience and, exercising that muscle again that Alison talked about, and that neuroelasticity that you talked around. Can we train our resilience muscle to be more what's the word I'm looking for? More prevalent when things are, necessarily not going well for us. Okay. So let's again delve a little bit further into these 4 things with some top tips. So we talk about something called a BHAG. What's a BHAG? This is a phrase that Mark taught me. So that's a big, hairy, audacious goal. So top tip number 1 is, first of all, think about, have you got a big, hairy, audacious goal? Do you know what your purpose and values are? Do you know what's important to you in life, in work? Maybe career aspiration, it may be a life aspiration. If you have that, write it down. Stick it on the wall if you've got an office at home or somewhere that you work at home, or a note in a notebook or whatever. But write down that big, hairy, audacious goal. and keep it at the forefront of your mind. And when you get setbacks, reframe the situation and think, how does this situation that I find myself in, even though I may not feel it's particularly positive or helpful at the moment, what are the learnings that I can take? How can that help me to learn, move forward, and accelerate towards that BHAG that I've written down? So that would be the first thing.
And that's not easy, either. And Alison, I'm sure you said to have that goal and to find that goal can be quite a challenge. And you may have to go through 1, 2, 3, 200 iterations to find that big, hairy, audacious goal for you. But I think it is amazing once you've got that, how you can start attaching things to it. And I think that purposefulness and that ability to check in about the setback, has it helped me move closer to it? Has it moved me further away? How's this change going to help me get there faster now? I think back to Alison's doors again, which works really well here.
Yeah.
Sorry, Ian. As Colin said, you can't keep us down when we got started. So
I'm used to being interrupted. Yeah, I'm used to being interrupted, Mark. So don't worry, you carry on. It links to one of the other 13 podcasts that obviously Colin is now considering that we might do in the future. So we had one of our other behaviours is clarity of purpose, and we talk a lot about having that clarity of purpose as an individual, but also thinking about if it's in a work environment, as we're talking about here. How does the work that I do on a day-to-day basis link to my own personal purpose? And does that align with the organizational purpose and values as well? And again, Alison, you will know this and we'll be able to talk about this far better than I can. When those three things align, that's when the magic really starts to happen for people in their work environment. So, it's really important to have that strong purpose. Okay. The next one, adaptability. So it says there, avoid assumed constraints. We tend to assume that things that have happened in the past are going to happen again in similar situations. But actually, one of the things that we think about is an opportunity that people often miss is self-coaching. So it says there, write down some self-coaching questions. So when you encounter situations that maybe are challenging or are considered to be setbacks, what's the best that could happen? As human beings, we often think about what's the worst that could happen, and we can quite often catastrophize about things, etc., etc. But actually, if you write down some self-coaching questions, and that's an example of one of them around what's the best that could happen in this situation, that again starts to reframe your thinking around the opportunities and the possibilities that might have been created by that situation that's arisen. And again, it links back to the Alison's exercise around a door that closed and another one that opened, and how you reframe that whole situation. So that's another one that we can do, and it's a relatively easy one to do in terms of that self-coaching exercise. Anything to say on that, Mark, before I move on?
Only your beautiful use of the word catastrophize. I've not heard that for a while, so that's the only thing I can possibly comment on that one.
Very good, thank you. The third one, confidence. Focus on your strengths. And this is really interesting. Mark and I do a lot of work with leaders around the pharma and life sciences world. And one of the things that I was doing in a recent project with some leaders is to ask them to tell me what their key strengths were as coaches. So there's a particular project on coaching. And you know what? People really struggled to articulate tangible strengths as coaches. So if you don't know what your strengths are, whether it's coaching or whatever the situation, then no one else is, it's harder for other people to recognize them. But in a situation when you are confident about your own strengths, as well as being aware of your own areas for development, let's call them, then actually you can leverage those strengths, those key strengths in situations when things aren't going well. And again, to use that word again, when things are going wrong and you start to can't even say it now, catastrophize. Yeah, there you go. I should have quit with one, shouldn't I?
Should have quit with one.
When you start to do that, then thinking about your key strengths and having a real clear self-awareness about those key strengths, lean into those strengths, that can help you get back on track and overcome whatever situation is unfolding in front of you. So if I was to ask anybody that's listening or watching this particular podcast, can you quickly name your own 5 top key strengths? And if you can't, have a think about it and write them down, maybe underneath your BHAG in your notebook or on your wall in your study at home. Okay. And then the final one, again, we've touched on this already, is we call it building personal power networks. So, I said before, avoid the naysayers. There will be people that, whatever the situation, that are almost allergic to any form of change or negativity. And I've experienced situations in the past where I've probably listened too much to people that are saying, this is terrible, what's going to happen, it's really bad. And actually surrounding yourself with people thinking, what's the opportunity that this brings, not just for me, but for all of us as a group, as a team. That's a really good space to be. So connect with people who see opportunities and that challenge you to find a better way forward, a way to grow and to move forward to a better future, rather than wallowing in the situation and struggling to break out of whatever habit or whatever situation that you're currently in. So those are the 4 things with some top tips. And as it says there, avoiding those people who wallow in self-pity. I'm gonna end on that and hand back to Mr. Jones, because I think that's a real strong message for all of us, as we think about how we and as teams can really overcome those difficult situations and build resilience moving forward. Yeah. Mr. Jones.
Yeah, definitely. And so I suppose just tying everything together, what Alison said and what you've presented there, Ian, is that opportunity for yourself or for you as a leader of the team, for example, to do some very quick, practical things to flex that resilience muscle, develop that resilience muscle. And, we've just tried to capture, 4 key things under the 4 headings. Are you and your team clear on what, their personal goals are and what yours are? Have you shared them, for example? Now, adaptability. Do you have a set of self-coaching questions that you can help guide you through? Have you written them down somewhere so you can quickly come back to them when needed? Post-it note on the screen, a little note in your notepad, whatever that be. Confidence. Do you know your strengths? I saw a great exercise a few months ago where somebody had actually videoed themselves talking about everything they can bring to different situations. And I said, why are you doing that? I said, so I can remind myself when I face these difficult situations, how good I am actually dealing with them. I thought, well, how brilliant is that from a confidence level? And of course, social support, ask yourself the question, who have you surrounded yourself with in the world and the organization in which you work, and are they there to bring you to keep you where you are if you're feeling a little bit stressed and challenged in different situations, or someone who's going to lift you out and make you think differently about that? So I think that just summarizes the sort of the practicality of things, and as we said before, right at the very start, hopefully seamlessly brings in Alison's discussion at the start and our practical tips for working in our industry and doing things differently with yourself and your team. Back to you.
Fantastic! Thank you so much, all of you, for giving us some advice and. I don't know if I had a little bit of a joke he says, but you 3 of you are experts in this field, and you've got more day-to-day experience of discussing this. Alison, obviously with your own role, perhaps more from a clinical aspect, and guys with the different teams that you work with in companies and experiences challenging. This is something certainly, obviously, in my other role within recruitment. That we see we've got the kind of resignation culture that that seems to have kind of come into play a little bit more. People just don't seem to have. I mean, my dad was in the same job, the same company for 35, 40 years. You don't see that now, and people are they're moving on for reasons that sometimes we can see from a recruitment perspective that you think, really, come on, where is your resilience in this? Where have we really examined this? Have we looked at this closely? And that's why I think it's such an important topic for us to consider and to look at from both angles. So before we wrap up, and I'm conscious of time here, we will finish very quickly. There were a couple of questions that came in. Well, there's more than a couple. I'm only going to raise a couple of questions, which I think are probably relevant to what we've been looking at, and one which is a big a big topic is around mental health. Let me read it, Alison. Maybe if you want to kick off with a quick answer on the guys, if you want to add on to this as well, is can you discuss the relationship between resilience and mental health, and how can individuals enhance their mental resilience? Now, we have talked a little bit, we have kind of touched on this a little bit, but is there anything you want to add to that, Alison, to help the person that asked that question?
I mean, in the first instance, so I'm a trauma expert, so I research PTSD. And one of the things that we look at when we research PTSD is why do some people the people can have the same traumatic experience, but not everybody develops PTSD. Now, there's a variety of reasons for that, but some of them, aside from sort of history, which is the biggest reason, history of previous trauma, actually, a lot of them are what we've been talking about today. So how do you adapt to this situation? Do you see a purpose? Do you see a higher goal here? Do you see what's your logic solving? What's your sort of problem solving here? I think when we talk about resilience and mental health, I think we need to be careful not to say that just because somebody is feeling depressed or stuck or low, that they're not a resilient person and therefore that's a failure on their behalf.
Absolutely.
I think we need to also be really mindful that actually when people are facing burnout, which I read a statistic recently about the pharma industry and actually quite a high prevalence of burnout in there. And actually one of the things that combated burnout specific to the pharma industry was a sense that you aligned with the company's goals. So I just wanted to tie in burnout there because I think when people are burnt out, they don't feel resilient. And that is a symptom of burnout, right? And I don't want us to sort of think, oh, because you're at burnout space, you could have done X, Y, and Z to prevent that, because that's very negative for the individual. I think we need to sort of focus our minds on the idea that good mental health is about having all of these things that, we've talked about. So confidence, social support, adaptability, purposefulness. But there's other things that contribute to mental health. Are you getting enough sleep? What's your diet like? How supported do you feel at work? Do you feel, somebody told me this the other day, do you have a psychologically safe workspace? I'd never heard this term in my life, and I asked them to explain it to me, and it was wonderful. Essentially, what they said is, do you feel safe enough to tell people at work when you feel mentally overwhelmed? Amazing. So I think, I mean, of course, there is a connection between a decrease in mental health and lowered resilience, but I wouldn't want us to kind of frame it as if you've got depression, it's because you're not resilient. Yeah. Because I think that's quite a dangerous sort of message.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I totally agree. And actually on burnout, Miriam, who's your CEO, and I did a separate podcast on burnout, which people would encourage people to go and look at, because there's a bit of correlation between what we're looking at just now. Guys, have you got anything to add to that? Have you got anything you want to add to that?
Absolutely not. No. Gonna go with the expert on that one, Colin.
I know, you're absolutely right. Well, one more question then, which I'll come to Ian and Mark about this. Our final question. So in the workplace, and we have talked a little bit about this because you've both given practical ways in which you can examine this. But is there anything else that leaders can foster resilience among their team members to improve overall performance and well-being? I know we've already looked at it and you've given some, but is there anything else that you can add to that particular question?
Mark, can I go first?
Jump. Yeah, go in. I've got a thought as well. So yeah.
Before you interrupt me. So I would say one of the things that leaders in organisations can do is, and you've just touched on it there, Alison, is that psychological safety piece. So even at the most simple level of first line manager with a group of people around them, can you create the right environment for those individuals to be able to speak up if they are suffering with workload or some challenges or whatever it might be, without fear of any sort of stigma being attached to that or whatever comeback there might be. But I think beyond that, there's also a massive accountability or responsibility from the organisation to create the right culture. and I've worked in and with different organisations with different cultures, and I think the organisational culture will go a hell of a long way to helping people to be more resilient. And there's a lot of components that make that up, and we've not got time to go into that now. But I've seen and worked in organisations where it's been far easier to be resilient than in others. Mark?
Yeah, I mean, with Ian on that, I said my only other angle would be, don't wait to be more resilient. Don't wait for your organisation to train you to be more resilient. Do something about it. Alison, ourselves, 3 or 4 tiny little practical tips today that you can apply to yourself or to your team that can help them start to develop that. So, don't wait to be trained. Start to do it now. Exercise like you would, if you're a runner or a cyclist or a sports person or somebody who loves walking, that whole sort of exercise this little bit up here and, do it now. Don't wait to be trained on it.
Good. There were 6 or 7 questions, but time it doesn't allow us to go through them all. So what I would say to people now is, if you have any further questions on this, either drop them into the comments. I never thought I'd ever say that, actually, because I'm not really drop them into the comments. I never thought I'd ever say that in a podcast.
Down with the kids, anyway. Colin. Yeah.
Sorry.
Down with the kids.
Drop them into
exactly.
the comment box. I know. Yeah. Or can send me a direct message, and we'll do our best to answer any questions possible that come through. But let me just kind of close by saying, finally, again, thank you to Alison, Ian, and Mark for your hugely insightful knowledge on a topic which anybody watching this will either be discussing or perhaps is experienced or is going through right now, potentially struggling with at the moment. And the good thing about what you've 3 of you have offered is some practical help. I think that's really important, that people can leave here with some practical things to go and try to help and to look into this subject a little bit more. And as a reminder to everyone watching this, if the Soke or the Future CX can be of any help to you guys personally watching this, you can visit thesoke.uk or you can visit futurecx.co.uk. Look into their websites, reach out to them if they can be of any help to you, as I said, personally or within your organisations. The guys would be more than happy to discuss that with you. Thank you so much to all 3 of you. We will bring this to a close, and I'll stop recording this in a second. Thank you very much, Alison, Ian, and Mark.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.